self-styled Christian superhero, the Atheist Antidote, or AA, doesn't apparently like atheists who think humans have no soul. No, not that kind of soul. This kind of soul.
Hello, Mr. Sailor.
Ahoy there, matey. Huh? A ghost!
Golly, I didn't mean to scare him.
Summing up the atheist's perspective, AA states,
from a purely materialist perspective, death seems to be the end. Questions like, where have I come from, or shall I live again? Such instinctual and universal ponderings from the human being are intellectual dead ends to the materialist, who denies outright the existence of a soul.
Atheists don't deny that there is a soul, any more than they deny that there is a God. Atheists merely lack belief in a soul, just as they lack belief in a God, because there is no evidence for this immaterial essence. Referring to age-old philosophical ponderings, however, is not counted as evidence that there is a soul.
They would argue there's no majestic difference between the brain and bile. Only one of our wishing. Of course, if you're someone that's free from such materialist mind shackles, there's a distinct problem. As we all know, waste is material, bile is mere matter, while thought is immaterial. Thought is beyond matter. Of course, the materialist is sure to fire back, but when the brain gets injured, you can't think as you once did, thus proving that thought is simply a product of matter and completely dependent upon it. But again, only from a confined mind do such limiting statements of the world come. Because you see, the brain is merely an instrument of the mind.
Before I can let AA prattle on, I have to interject. Unfortunately, these observations will have to come from a confined mind, and they likely will get lost in that vast savanna of the theist's free-roaming, free-range expanse between their ears, filled as it were already with 6 days of creation, a worldwide flood, talking donkeys, and people rising from the dead. Nonetheless, I must point out that the brain is not an instrument of the mind. Where does he get that? Asserting such a thing already begs his question that the mind is somehow independent of the brain and can run free without it, only passing by the brain to use it whenever necessary. But this superhero talks so fast it's hard to get a word in edgewise, and assertions like these pass quickly by, and no one has a chance to stop and think about what he is saying. Trust me, it's difficult to edit these clips as the guy hardly stops to take a breath. I'll deal with this assertion that the brain is merely a passive instrument of the mind later, after AA gives the following analogy.
Because you see, the brain is merely an instrument of the mind, somewhat like your computer's hardware, which allows you use of your software. You can destroy that hardware, and although the software appears temporarily to be useless, the software is not broken or destroyed in and of itself. That software can be extracted and powered using new hardware. We are, every one of us, a temporary material instrument upon which an immaterial master plays.
So, we have AA comparing the brain to a computer and the mind to the software which runs on it. I've never seen software that can run without a computer, and even AA has to admit this inescapable fact. He says,
that software can be extracted and powered using new hardware.
So, what's the new hardware? Another computer, of course. And software isn't something immaterial. It is a set of instructions, a code, a language, that when read by a computer turns on and off electrical impulses. It certainly doesn't do that outside a computer, and as such is useless. Has it gone anywhere if there is no computer to read it? No, because it is stored on physical media. How about if we take that media and destroy it? Take a 3 1/4 inch floppy and expose it to a magnet, snap a CD in half, burn a hard drive. Where's that software code now? Gone. Without the physical media to carry it, or the physical hardware to read it, it's gone. It doesn't exist, just as the mind fails to exist outside the brain.
One of the coolest ways of looking at this is to think of a thread of consciousness that runs continuously through a man's life.
If there is a string of consciousness, it exists only because man has a brain. Remove the brain, the string gets cut. Just like computer software. Without the storage media, the software disappears when the computer gets turned off. Irretrievable.
Within that thread of consciousness and memory, we find common sense proof of an immaterial soul, independent of the body's mere material composition. The molecular makeup of the brain, as well as the rest of your body, is not the same from year to year. It's not even the same from minute to minute. Yet your essence, yes, your soul, survives these many transformative changes of biology.
AA makes it sound as if our biological body goes through massive remodelings on a year-to-year, day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. That entire molecules are ripped down en masse and then reconstructed, like a hard drive being reformatted. Its physical components, like the disks and the reader, being stripped down and replaced, and yet somehow that string of consciousness, the software, remains unaffected. Balderdash. Indeed, our bodies change. Cells constantly are being made and replace older cells. But there is not some wholesale destruction of the map that is you, being rewritten biologically, moment to moment. The cell that replaces another is a duplicate cell, like taking software from one sector of a disk to another during defragmentation. Poor analogy, but I hope you get the point. Because our brain has a complicated way of storing information, that information is not lost because molecules come and go, and cells die and are replaced. It has nothing to do with something immaterial, but with the physical layout of the brain. I have a scar on my left knee from an injury I received when I was about 4 years old. It's still there, over 40 years later. Indeed, the cellular structure of my body had changed multiple times over the years, and yet the scar remains. Is AA trying to argue that this scar is actually an injury to my soul, coded there to remain even though my body transforms itself yearly, daily, second by second? Or is the scar, like the neural pathways of the brain, something that is permanently coded now into my biological body? And even though cells live, reproduce themselves, and die, that scar and the neural pathways of my brain are reproduced with the replacements of those cells, those molecules, those atoms.
You'll very likely be a different biological person the day you die than you are now. And yet, amazingly, the soul can summon any point along that individual line of consciousness.
There he goes again, asserting that the soul exists without providing any evidence, and then telling us details about what it can do. A soul does not summon bits of consciousness. Like software instructions coded magnetically, as on floppies or hard drives, or as peaks and pits, as on CDs, human and all animal memories are stored as neural pathways in the brain. Wish that soul good luck retrieving a bit of that coded memory should damage occur to any of those pathways, just as software is damaged if media is exposed to magnets or scratches. No amount of supernatural wishful thinking will restore such damage, and it is evidence from such damage that lets us know that this so-called immaterial thought is indeed inextricably linked to its material host. Wipe out neural pathways, you wipe out thought.
Music, sound, scent, voices, faces can represent themselves at will.
Yes, indeed. We can call forth, like a central processor can search out the code it needs to perform a function, memories stored as neural pathways in our brains. But research has shown that interruptions, physical, material interruptions, of those pathways will make willful retrieval of that information impossible. Indeed, not everything that has ever occurred to us, everything we've learned through life, is stored. I have no recollection of having my umbilical cord cut, or of having a diaper changed, or of undergoing surgery to insert metal screws into my broken ankle a number of years ago. Days and days of activity in which I participated are forever lost. If there is a soul which can recall with supernatural specificity anything that has occurred during this life's so-called uninterrupted string of consciousness, a soul separate from the brain and able to survive its death, why can't I recall these events with the same clarity that I can recall my high school graduation, the first date I had with my wife, or the birth of my children? I was surely there for all these forgotten events, my birth, the diaper changes, my surgery, just as I was for all the memorable ones. So why can't my soul represent these at will through the mere passive instrument of my brain, superhero? Think about that. I'll have more for you to ponder in part 2.